Hi, my name is Lily and welcome to my channel and welcome to my July reading wrap up. So in July I read a grand total of 12 books, and this was a mixture of ebooks, audiobooks and physical copies, but mostly ebooks and audiobooks. 12 is quite a lot for me, so I'm really surprised by this. Okay. 12 is a lot for me, so I am surprised by this, and I don't expect to maintain this throughout the year, but it was a really good reading month for me and I had a really good time with it. I will say there were quite a few shorter books in this and novellas, I guess, or they're not really novellas, they are individual books, but they are short books, so that's why it's 12. It's not 12 like 500-page books, which is how I've managed it. So I think this 12 book month is the same number of pages as like my 10 book months, if that gives you some context. I am not normally a 12 book a month person. Okay, so I started the month with Things We Hide from the Light by Lucy Score. This is the second book in the Knock 'Em Out series, so it is the sequel to Things We Never Got Over, I think. So this one is Nash and Lena's story. They do appear in the first book. So Nash is the brother of the male main character in the first book, and Lena is the male main character's best friend. So this one I gave a 3 stars. It follows Nash, who is a police officer who in book 1 ends up as part of a traumatic incident. I will not spoil it for you, and since then he has been dealing with panic attacks and depression and general anxiety as well. And then we have Lena, who works in insurance, who has just moved to town on an insurance job, and they happen to be across the hall neighbours, and they feel this chemistry between them, but Lena doesn't do committed relationships and Nash is kind of all over the place right now. It's a decent romance. It's fun, but you have to really suspend your disbelief with this book. This series is not about realism. And there's a lot of ridiculous moments, there's a lot of over-the-top alphaness. I didn't enjoy this as much as the first one, and I think that's because I'm more aware of the issues in the writing now that I'm on book 2 than I was in book 1. And also I just felt there was a lot of lack of consent in this book, where like Nash forces himself on Lena quite a lot. And even though she likes it, it feels like it sets a bad precedent for me. So overall, I wouldn't like rave about this series. I wouldn't highly recommend it as a romance series, but if you're interested in the tropes, maybe it's one to pick up. Then we have The Chase by Elle Kennedy. This is the first book in the Briar U series, which is a spin-off from the Off-Campus series. I think it happens a little bit after the Off-Campus series, for memory, so it's like a year or two after the end of the Off-Campus series. So in this one, our female main character has just been kicked out of college at another college, I can't remember which one, and she's been kicked out of her sorority as well. So she needs somewhere to stay at the new college she's transferring to, and she ends up moving in with the Briar U hockey team. And she has this chemistry with one of the guys on the team, but she thinks that he sees her as this ditzy, stupid girl because she overheard him describing her that way when he was drunk once. And it's about this back and forth tension between them. Now, this one I really wanted to like. It is an enemies to lovers, which is not my favourite of the romance tropes or genres, but I love a hockey romance. And I really liked this one had dyslexia and learning difficulty rep in the female main character, but there was just something missing for me that didn't have the charm of the original Off-Campus series for me, and it felt just kind of dry and repetitive and boring. I do want to give this series at least one more book, but I am not convinced I'm going to love it as much as the Off-Campus series, so we'll see. Next up we have Neutral Zone by Tegan Hunter. This is another contemporary hockey romance, and this one for me was another 3 stars. So this one was quite short and I felt like it rushed a lot of things just to get to the spice, and it was one of those books where I was reading it thinking, if you wanted this to be just a 5 chilies spice book, just write that instead of trying to force a very quick plot. So this one we have our hockey player who is a bit of a loner, and in his spare time he basically spends all of his time watching this female streamer who happens to be like the employee of one of his friends' wives. She runs the donut truck that the team visits like every day that's outside their training ground, and it is about like their secret they begin a romance while he's also secretly still being this person who's anonymous in her streams, and they're like spicy streams. it just was very bland. I don't have a lot to say about this one. Honestly, when I saw it on my list of books I read this month, I had to Google it to remind myself of what the book even was. So I feel like that says a lot. It is book 7 in a series, but you didn't need to have read the rest of the books. You could tell there were callbacks to previous books, but it didn't ruin the reading experience, but I wasn't particularly enjoying it anyway. Okay, now we've got to one that I'm very, very excited about, and that is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, which is a 5-star read from me and is definitely a new all-time favourite. If you want to see my full thoughts on this one and a reading vlog, I will link it up in the cards and down below, but this one was just so charming. So this is a cosy sci-fi, so if you've read cosy fantasy books like Legends and Lattes and The House of the Cerulean Sea, this is kind of a similar vibe, but sci-fi. So it follows a young woman who has started a new job on a ship as basically like kind of the admin person on the ship, and basically the crew of this ship have just taken on a new job where they're going to have to take a very, very long journey to get to an angry planet, and basically they create these tunnels like that jump between different points in space, and so they need to do the journey to build a tunnel. And so it follows the crew on this year-long journey, but it's not about that, and it's more about the relationships between the crew members, how they develop, seeing about the history of the different species that they are, and discussions around how the different species have worked together, how they've fought, and the wars that have happened. And it's just so interesting, so cozy, and just lovely. And I loved all of the characters by the end. I actually cried reading this book, which is very unheard of. I don't cry reading books like ever. I couldn't tell you the last book that made me cry. So that is saying a lot, and I'm so excited about this. I've actually bought the special edition Illumicrate set off of someone on Vinted, and I was very excited to find it, and I'm so excited to continue this series. I cannot wait. Next we have another favourite, and that is Freehand by E.M. Lindsay. This is an adult contemporary romance. It is a male-male romance, and it follows a tattoo artist and a deaf florist. And basically the tattoo artist has some PTSD from some childhood trauma, and he meets this florist when he's having a panic attack, and the florist supports him through the panic attack, not knowing him and obviously not being able to hear him. And it's about them learning to have this relationship together, and how they both decide to give in to the relationship even though they're both reluctant to be in a relationship with each other. The florist is reluctant because he is deaf and he's very reluctant to date hearing people, and the tattoo artist has a lot of trauma and isn't sure that he is good enough to date the other guy. So that was a 5-star new favourite romance for me that I highly recommend. The cover is very misleading and makes it look like it's a super spicy romance, but it really isn't. You have to get quite far in the book before they even decide to start dating. Then we have Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This is an adult thriller / mystery book. This one I gave 2 stars, I think. Yes, 2 stars. So this one is about a family trip in a ski resort in Australia. It is a family reunion, and our main character Ernie is very nervous because this family reunion has been organised because his brother Michael is about to get out of prison, and the reason his brother is in prison is because Ernie testified against him in a murder trial and basically snitched on him. And so it's about them having this family reunion after Michael is released from prison, but during the family reunion somebody dies. And so Ernie takes it upon himself to try and figure out who the murderer is. So this was a book club book for my in-person book club, and I will say it was a 50-50 split on whether people loved it or hated it, and we loved it or hated it for the same reasons. So in this book there's a lot of humour because the author is a comedian, and whether you enjoy that humour is very hit or miss. And there's a lot of breaking the fourth wall that a lot of us really, really didn't enjoy. And I found the ending very unsatisfying, and honestly I can't really tell you much more about this book without spoilers and why I didn't like it, but I think this book misleads you a lot in a way that I don't think is fair in a mystery book. It's hard to explain, but yeah, I think it's one of those books that felt very unsatisfying, very misleading, and I just didn't enjoy it, didn't like any of the characters. There's a huge cast and it's really hard to keep track of who is who and who everybody is linked to, and that made it really difficult to enjoy because as people were revealing secrets, I wasn't bothered. Okay, I'm going to lump the next 3 together because I don't really want to review them separately, but I read books 2 to 4 in the... oh my god, what's the series called? can't remember what the series is called. It's a Dana Eiley series, and the first book is Games We Play, I think. So I read the next three, I think. I don't remember. Basically, they all melded into one because I read them in basically one day, because they're the kind of book that you just kind of get sucked into. So these are 5 chili level romance books that are very addictive to read, but not very good. They're very, very insta-lovey. They are very morally grey, which is not my vibe. And honestly, I was just reading them because I wanted to see the rest of the series and see what happened to each character. But I basically got to the last book and was like, why am I still doing this? And so they're only like 150 pages each, which is why I read so many books this month. But yeah, they're all 3-star reads for me. If you're interested in them, I'd recommend looking up each individual book, but I wouldn't really recommend this series unless it's something that you're really into. Then I read The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston, which was for Amy's book club. This is an adult magical realism romance. So in this one, our main character is a ghostwriter for a very famous romance author, but she's had a very bad breakup and no longer believes in love and doesn't want to finish the final book. So she goes to the editor, who is new. And when she meets him, she kind of has this moment where she's like, oh my god, he's so hot. And then she tries to convince him to let her not write the book, and he doesn't agree. But that night she goes home and finds out that her father has died. So everything kind of gets shoved aside and she goes home to help organise her father's funeral. Her father is, or was, a funeral director. Their whole family grew up in a funeral home, basically. And so he's got all of these elaborate things they need to do for the funeral. But also, she is able to see ghosts, something she inherited from her father. Usually the ghosts have an unfinished business that she has to help them with. And while she is there preparing for her father's funeral, the ghost of her editor appears. And so it is a romance between her and the ghost of her editor. It sounds really good, but for me, I felt like the big twist at the end was very, very obvious. And I struggled to believe in the romance, and then also the big twist was obvious to me, so I didn't get a big twist in this book, and it felt kind of unsatisfying to read. But I will say, I really enjoyed the characters. I thought the main character was lovely, she's very relatable. It's a little bit millennial cringe, there's a lot of millennial cringe humour in this book, but I thought in general they were really sweet characters, and I loved seeing the whole family as they tried to navigate the grief and organising her father's funeral, and yeah, I thought it was a good book on that side of things, but the romance let me down and the big plot twist let me down. And then I read Lost in the Moment and Found by Shauna Maguire. This is the latest book in the Wayward Children series. This one follows a girl who enters into the world of lost things. So she goes through a door when she runs away from home, and she arrives in this place of lost things. This is another new favourite for me this month. I had three favourites this month, which is pretty unheard of for me. This was a 5-star, and it is probably my new favourite Wayward Children's book. I love a market book. This one has a lot of going to markets, but I also really liked the exploration of morals and time and what things are worth and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I thought it was a beautiful story. It's very hard to read the beginning part of it, but there is trigger warnings if you need them on the front of the book, and it's a very emotional story, but it's a very well written story, and the way things are gradually revealed to you is really interesting. I didn't feel like I knew what was coming, which is very good, and it's got a slight little bit of absurdism that all of these books have, without going as far as some of the like true nonsense world books we've had before. So I think this one's probably going to be more popular among the general crowd that reads these books. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was a very interesting world. I could have read a lot more from it. I think my only complaint with the Wayward Children series is that they're not told in order. So this character, I'm pretty sure, has appeared in previous Wayward Children's books, and this is almost like a prequel book telling her story about before she arrived at the house that the children live in. So it is a bit confusing to follow, but a wonderful series and a wonderful edition nonetheless. And finally, we have Two for Dinner by Rachel A. Smith. I'm pretty sure I got this in one of those Stuff Your Kindle giveaway days where they do free romance books. You could try out different authors. This one, I think I gave 3 stars. It is a contemporary romance. It is a really short book. And honestly, the reason I picked it is I was feeling very slumpy and I used a random number generator on my TBR until I got to a trashy romance. And this was the trashy romance that was the first one to come up in that auto-generating thing. So I was like, oh, I'm going to read it. It was in fact a trashy romance. So this one is about a woman who finds out, I think she finds out that her partner on her wedding day is cheating on her. And so she flies out to a private island that her friend has rented for her to hide away for a bit. But when she gets there, she finds out that the owner, the billionaire owner of the private island, did not know it had been booked and is also there. And they start to spend time together and they can feel this attraction to each other, but she's a bit nervous because she's just had this big breakup. So it's fun. I enjoyed it. It's an interesting read in the story side of things, but the sex scenes were absolutely horrendous. They were awful. Like, this book was not very well written, especially the sex scenes. So as much as I enjoyed it and it was quick, if it wasn't as short as it was, I probably would have DNF'd, but because it was so short, I just kept reading and it occupied my mind for the time I wanted it to. So those were all of the books that I was going to talk to you about today. That was quite quick. I didn't have much time to film this, so I tried to do kind of a speedier wrap up this time. But let me know in the comments what your best book of July was, your worst book of July, or if you've read any of these books, let me know what your thoughts were. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more content from me. All of my social media links are in the description below. If you'd like to leave me a comment to let me know you are here, leave me the skull emoji in the comments below. Thank you again for watching. Bye!